Okay, continuing here in chapter 3, week 3 material, federalism. We're on slide number 32. So federalism changes now as we move into the 1930s because of the advent of the Great Depression and a lot of what Franklin Delano Roosevelt does in the New Deal. Okay, and so there was a move to deal with business. Okay, now already Democratic Party and progressives members like Theodore Roosevelt began to fight against uncontrolled business power. In other words, that move was afoot anyway, because again, there was a lot of exploitation and things going on. Okay, but what really caused government regulation of business to accelerate was the Great Depression, right? You had the markets collapse and you had 25% unemployment, okay? Which is, again, think what we just walked through with the COVID-19 pandemic and unemployment reaching those levels, okay? I just read today in the news that unemployment's back down to 13%, but still that's extraordinary for us in our era, okay? And how the government stepped in, in March and April and May with the CARES Act, the Payment Protection Program, and these infusions of cash to Americans to get them through this whole difficult crisis. That's the same type of thing that happened in the 1930s, okay? The thinking was if the markets are left to themselves, basically people are not going to get out of this unemployment, the economy is going to stay tanked, and it's going to be problematic. Okay, that's the thinking. Okay, now we'll talk about this later when we get into the chapter on economic policy, that there's actually economic proof that America has historically had downturns and upticks, and in those downturns, if government didn't do anything, we would get out of them within about a couple of years, tops. Okay, with the Great Depression, when the government started getting involved, we actually, the argument goes like this, and I've seen data that confers with this, or correlates with this, is this idea that we would have probably gotten out of the Great Depression in about 1935, 36, okay? But because the government intervened, it actually was extended to we actually didn't get out of the Great Depression until 1943, 2 years into World War II in full production. So kind of interesting. But be that as it may, the government began to regulate the economy because of all of the unemployment and all that was going on, okay? States couldn't help the unemployment because they were broke, because of declining tax revenues. There was a huge demand for revenue. And so FDR steps in with the New Deal, seeking to nationalize the economy. Again, when we talk about nationalizing the economy, government stepping in, taking over sectors of the economy because of some form of breakdown, okay? If you go to slide number 33, okay, the Supreme Court began to agree with the New Deal, okay, and began to side with the New Deal. Of course, after some political maneuvering from FDR, okay. What happened is FDR starts nationalizing all these industries, and a lot of these industries were crying foul and saying, listen, the government can't price control. Government can't control production. Government can't tell us what to produce, what not to produce. We're America. We're Americans. We're free. What's up with, what about our liberty, right? And again, you're coming off of the era of laissez-faire capitalism, where government never did regulate large segments of the economy. Now in the 1930s, under FDR, under the New Deal policies, they are, okay? So a lot of these went to the Supreme Court, okay? And initially the Supreme Court was striking them down, saying, listen, it's unconstitutional. Government can't do that. Government can't do that. That's not in the Constitution. We look at Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and we say, listen, there's all these enumerated powers. It doesn't say government can price fix. It doesn't say government can control the means of production, or government can't control and tell businesses what to produce and what not to produce, okay? So in a particular case called Schechter Poultry Corp. Versus the United States, the Supreme Court held that the National Industry Recovery Act was unconstitutional, okay? And this was a big part of FDR's program, okay? So FDR gets upset, because he realizes I can't get around the Supreme Court. And so he begins to make this case that, you know what, I'm gonna pack the court, okay? The court's got 9 people, I want it to be 13. Because again, he's thinking if I can get an extra 4 people on the court that are my picks, they're gonna begin to side with me and we're gonna begin to start winning, and basically all of these policies are gonna be declared constitutional. So he began to argue that, you know what, the court, a lot of these judges, they're old, they might be getting a little senile, they can't keep up with the workload, we need to give them some help. So it was a court packing scheme. Okay, and so what happened was he was on his way to doing that, and then Justice Owen Roberts, in a case in 1930, I think it's 37, switched sides on a New Deal case and sided with the New Deal. Again, approved one of his policies, and it was called the switch in time that saved 9. Right? It saved the 9 justices so it wouldn't go to 13. And so what happened is the court began to start agreeing with the New Deal policies, which began to expand the size and scope of government. So what am I saying in all of this? Okay, the court began to be complicit with the New Deal. It began to be complicit in enlarging the size and scope of the national government. It began to be complicit in saying that the expanding the general welfare clause is constitutional and can be done by the federal government, okay? And so one of the other rulings the court ruled upon at this time, the court declared that Congress's commerce power is as broad as the needs of the nation. Okay, so if you understand that, that basically means Congress can regulate any part of Congress it wants. Whatever the needs of the nation are, Congress can regulate it. Okay, so it was an extraordinary power grab by the federal government, and the court basically condoned it. Okay, kind of interesting. So here's an example of this. Okay, if you go to slide number 34, there was a case called Helvering versus Davis in 1937. And it was a case that basically dealt with Social Security. We assume that Social Security is constitutional today. We assume that Social Security is an expected thing. Yeah, the government provides for my retirement. Well, back then, it was controversial. Back then, the thinking was, as Americans, we don't really look to the government for our solutions. We are, because of individualism, we take care of our retirement ourselves. We take care of our future ourselves. We don't need the government to help us. We can do it ourselves. We're not victims. We can do this. Well, the constitutional justification for Social Security was that the welfare clause within the Constitution is basically gives Congress the right to provide for the general welfare of Americans in old age. Because within the Great Depression, people's savings were lost. They didn't have anything for retirement. They didn't have a job. So the thinking is the federal government's got to step in and provide for them. So here's the logic that the court used, and you need to understand this. It says this: Congress may, in other words, the Supreme Court sided in favor of the New Deal. The Supreme Court sided in favor of Social Security being constitutional. Congress may spend money in aid of the general welfare. There have been great statesmen in our history who have stood in the way of other views, stood for other views. We will not resurrect the contest. It is now settled by decision. The conception of the spending power advocated by Hamilton, again, Hamilton was a big government guy, and strongly reinforced by Story, that was another justice, has prevailed over Madison. Again, who was James Madison, right? Basically wrote the Constitution. Limited government guy. Government can't do everything. Government must be limited. So the Supreme Court said, listen, we're siding with big government. We're siding with what Hamilton viewed government to be over the Madisonian version of the Constitution, the small government version of the Constitution. So that's a very important decision, not just because it constitutionalized Social Security, but it revealed where the court was going. We are siding with big government from now on. We are moving away from limited constitutional government of James Madison. Okay, so again, if you want to understand why government's gotten so big today, a lot of it has to do with the logic of Helvering v. Davis, okay? So I'm going to stop there and continue with slide 35 next.